Hi, I'm Yellow Sleeves, and this is part 3 in a 3-part mini-series in which I break down my song Meditate. In part 1, I covered the writing process, the inspiration behind the song. I talked a little bit about the genre and the vibes I was trying to go for, and if you want to check that video out, I'm going to post it up here. In part 2, I talked about the gear I used, both for recording and also the instruments I used and why I used those specific instruments. And I also talked about the plugins I used to shape the sound. If you want to check that one out, I'm going to put it somewhere up here as well. And in this final part, we're going to be talking about the arrangement, and we're also going to talk about mixing. Now, before I dive into it, I want to talk about a few things, which is this isn't necessarily going to be a mixing tutorial by any means, and I don't feel that I'm the right person to be giving general mixing advice. I'm still figuring out a whole lot of stuff on my own, and honestly, there's no shortage of really good tutorials on YouTube, so this isn't going to be that. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what I did, and if there's any fancy decision-making process behind what I did, I'm going to share that with you. So this isn't really intended as a follow along or general mixing advice type of video as much as it's a bit of a behind the scenes, this is what I've done step by step type of thing. Also, the video isn't sponsored by anybody. I'm not trying to sell you anything. Any gear you see me using, well, plugins specifically, they've all been either bought by me or they came as a freebie with one of the pieces of gear I bought. But without any further ado, let's have a look at the arrangement. There's a dog barking outside.
Take that dog.
So let's talk about the arrangement. What I said in part 1 of this mini-series is that I wanted the arrangement to be this additive process where it starts small and I keep adding more layers as the track progresses. So what I've done is I reshuffled the tracks in my session so that the longest track is at the bottom and the shortest ones are at the top, and this can better visually illustrate this additive process over time. Here I have different markers that delimitate the different sections of the song. There are 4 sections which are all comprised by 8 different bars, and at the end of each section, the last 2 bars has a different guitar fill to sort of spice things up a little bit. The loop on its own felt a little bit too repetitive, and I wanted something to give it just a little bit of an extra hook and not have it be as monotonous. The track starts with the lead guitar down here with the rhythm guitar soon to follow. After that, the drums kick in, soon after that the bass, and then we have the bass synth, the keys, and a pad with the shaker, and after that we have the, I call it the synth harmony, but really it's just a synth texture to add a bit more interest, and the pandeiro and the tambourine kick in to add a little bit more rhythmic interest and also support the snare a little bit, which is what the tambourine is doing. I break all of these things down in a little bit more detail in part 2 if you want a bit more of a deeper dive into all of these decisions and all of these layers. So I think as far as the arrangement is concerned, that's pretty much all there is to it. The lead guitar goes all the way through and I just add more and more sections and layer them up. And I wanted the song to go through this build-up of instruments and of sounds and textures. Because I've decided the song to be the intro to my EP, I wanted it to start off the EP with a bit of a mood setting of what's to come. So I wanted it to go from this very far away, ethereal kind of beginning and then just grow more and more to this climax and then leave a little bit of space at the end. So this is what the arrangement was trying to do, and this is how I've done it by layering up the different instruments. Typically, I have percussion at the very bottom with drums above that, with bass and guitar above that, and lastly I have synths. And above synths, I tend to keep any samples or ear candy unless I feel they belong someplace else in the hierarchy. At the very bottom, I tend to keep tracks that I imported from the demo. In this case, you see here a drum guide, which is the drums that I used during production. I bring those in to make sure that what I'm doing to the various instruments is an improvement rather than a sort of regressive step to something that sounds worse. So it helps with keeping myself in check. At the very top, usually I bring in the demo, and I tend to do this for the same exact reason of checking back and A/B testing the new mix and what I had in the first instance to make sure that I don't miss out on the initial vibe that I was getting with the demo or with the pre-production. Cool, so that's pretty much all the housekeeping part and the session setup part. I'm only going to be covering the bigger picture mixing stuff in this video. So let's have a look at that and start with the drums. Typically, I start my mixing process by mixing the kick and the snare. Let's have a look at the kicks. I layered up this kick with this 808 and they sound like this. As far as the 808 is concerned, the only thing I've done to it is I added this pull take EQ with the kick bright setting that I just tweaked a little bit until I found something that I liked. This is it without the processing. And with the processing. As far as the acoustic kick is concerned, I added this acoustic kick compressor that comes with Ableton, and it sounds like this, without. So it brings the kick a little bit more in your face. I layered that up with this Pulsar W495 using a tweaked version of the acoustic kick preset, which does this. As you can see, it's boosting the low end a whole lot. It's boosting the high end a whole lot, which helps a little bit with the clickiness of the kick. And then it's bringing down some of the mids to remove some of the mud. After that, I processed both of the kicks together by adding a glue compressor. I use the glue compressor pretty much everywhere, and I think it's one of my favorite Ableton stock plugins. And as you'll see, I'm adding the glue compressor pretty much everywhere in this track. I use a saturator and the EQ8. The glue compressor does a really good job at bringing both of those two kicks together and unifying them a little bit, and it sounds like this. And I have the soft clip option set on. The saturator does this. Makes the kick just a tiny bit more aggressive. As you can see, I'm using this dry wet knob at about 60% and the soft sine. I'm not trying to do too much with it, but I did want to give it just a bit more oomph. And lastly, I'm using this EQ8, and I'm using it really just to tame the kick a little bit. However, this EQ8 I only brought in after I had all the layers in the mix, and I added it in so that the kicks sit a little bit better in the mix. The snare doesn't really do a whole lot. Sample packs in general, the samples tend to be really tidily recorded and set up for us to use as consumers. I didn't want to do too much and potentially undo some of the character that was built into it by Circle's drums. Snare on its own sounds like this. The only thing that I'm doing to it really is I'm adding this 1176 compressor with a tweaked version of the pop snare preset. That's pretty much all there is to it. A little bit further in the track, I am layering up this clap, which on its own sounds like this. And for that, I'm using the soft snare compressor, and I'm also using this snare EQ3 that comes built in with Ableton. And both of them together sound like this. As you can hear, it adds a bit more snap to the sound. Both snare and clap together sound like this. Next up, We have the hi-hat. I just have the hat EQ1 and a bit of an overdrive on it. The hat on its own sounds like this. With the EQ, it thins it up and it boosts the high end over here, so it makes it stick a little bit better in the mix. And with the overdrive, it's subtle, but I felt it does enough to bring it through in the mix. The drums on their own sound like this. As you can hear, there's a whole lot of kick that takes up most of the space. Everything else is just there to support and keep the rhythm going. The kick is really the bread and butter of this track. As far as the drum bus processing is concerned, the only thing I've done to the drums is add the glue compressor, surprise, surprise. And this is what it sounds like without and with. And further into the song. And I'm using a little bit of parallel processing over here with the wet being down to 73%. Next up, let's talk about the bass. I'm not going to cover the individual tracks as I've done that in part 2. I'm just going to talk about the bass group processing. This is what the bass layers sound on their own without any processing. And what I've done on the bass group is added the glue compressor. As I said, it's everywhere. I've added tape for baby audio, another compressor, and a little bit of gain automation. But let's start with the glue compressor, the bass without. And this is with. The group without the glue compressor feels like there are a few different layers going on, and the glue really does glue the different layers together and make them sound like one unit rather than 3 distinct layers. Next up, I added tape just to give it a bit more of a tape feel. And then I added a sidechain compressor and I added it to the kicks group. So whenever the kick hits, the bass gets a little bit quieter, which allows the kick to stand out in the mix a little bit better. And last up, there's just some gain automation. And what that does is just brings in the bass a little bit gently in the intro. And it progressively gets louder. It's pretty subtle. It only goes from minus 1.77 dB all the way through to 0, but it did just enough to ease in the bass into the song rather than have it come in like a bulldozer. The bass and the drums together sound like this. Next up, let's talk about the rhythm guitars. The rhythm guitars are fairly simple. The only thing that I'm doing with them is I have a sidechain compressor that ducks the rhythm guitars whenever the kick hits. As I said previously, I wanted the kick to really take up a lot of space and feel like a heartbeat, so I wanted to duck as many elements out of its way as I could. And other than that, there's some gain automation as well. That just does the same exact thing that I was doing for the bass, just eases in the guitars. All 3 layers together sound like this. I covered the guitar tones in a little bit more depth, including EQ and some other effects processing in part 2, in case you want to see that in a bit more depth. But let's move on to the lead guitar. I'm using a glue compressor for the same exact reason I've used the glue compressor up until now. And in the same way, I'm using a little bit of gain automation as well. And I'm using Baby Audio's Transit to add in a whole lot of reverb in the intro. So the glue compressor sounds like this. It focuses the sound a little bit more and brings together the two lead guitar layers. The automation does the same exact thing as it was doing on the other tracks, it just eases in the track. And as far as transit is concerned, I'm using this cavern, and what this does, it rolls off some of the reverb, and it makes it feel like the guitar is getting closer and closer to you. So there's a whole lot of reverb at the beginning of the song, and then I'm dialing down that reverb all the way through to 0. Let's talk about synths. We can start with the synth bass, and the processing is pretty straightforward. I used an EQ8 to cut a little bit of the lows and boost around 1K. I also used the Studio D chorus from Universal Audio on the number 4 setting and also in stereo mode. And I used the sidechain compressor. This is what it sounds like on its own. With the EQ on. It sort of tightens and focuses the sound a little bit. Obviously, it cuts some of the low end, but that's fine because we have the bass doing the low end. And actually, while we're at it, together with the bass, that sounds like this. As you can see, without the EQ, it feels like it clashes with the bass a little bit more. The chorus sounds like this. Which obviously widens the sound quite a bit, but also gives it a bit of more of a smooth sort of quality. Next up, let's look at some of the keys. This is what they sound like without any processing. And what I've done to them is just apply a little bit of EQ. I took away quite a bit of the low end with a high pass filter at 120 Hertz. I also removed some 250, nearly 4.5 decibels over there. Didn't really do anything to the high end. This is what it sounds like without. And with. It's pretty subtle, but it took away a lot of the mud that would have built up otherwise. As far as the pad is concerned, this is what it sounds like without any processing. And the only processing I've done to it is adding this EQ8, where I did a high pass on 100 Hertz, and I also boosted 1K by a tiny bit. And this is what it sounds like with. And that's it for the pad. Last up, we have this synth, which is the Opal synth by Universal Audio. First in the chain is an EQ8, rolled off a whole lot of low end, and also boosted everything at 1.8K. And then I used dirty tape from Softtube with quite a bit of dirt on and middle of the road drive. And as you can hear, it modulates the sound quite a bit and it makes it sort of wobbly. And I think that works quite well in this context. And I've also sidechained this to the kick as well. I sidechained most elements to the kick. And that's about it for the synths. Let's have a look at the percussion. I didn't do any processing on the individual percussion elements. As far as the group processing is concerned, the first element in the chain is this 1176 from Universal Audio with these settings and with. It focuses everything quite a bit more and it feels like it brings the part to life. Then I cut quite a lot of the lows up to 147 and without. just removes a tiny bit of the mud. Next in chain, we have the oxide tape from Universal Audio. And without. Just adds the slightest bit of coloration to the sound. And then we have a sidechain compressor, again sidechained to the kick, and that helps the percussion duck out of the kick's way. And that pretty much covers all of the mixing elements. I didn't do a whole lot, just did a little bit of cleanup. I didn't do any fancy sound design or sculpting the sounds or anything like that. I really just corrected a few things, took a few frequencies out of the equation, and didn't do a whole lot of enhancing, just a tiny bit. Next up, we can talk about the mastering. The only thing I've done is I added this tape plugin from Baby Audio using this instrumental goodness setting. The song without it sounds like this. And with. It really brings everything together and it glues everything together quite nicely, and also adds a little bit of that tape flavor, so it really helps with the mood and the vibe of the song. And I'm a big user of Ozone, and I've been using Ozone 11 to master this. I typically just use the assist and I fine tune afterwards. I use the pop target this time around, and then I tweaked things to taste. I would be lying if I pretended to be a skilled mastering engineer. And that pretty much covers everything I've done for both the mixing and the mastering of the song. As you've seen, there wasn't anything too left field, too creative or out of the ordinary. Just pretty basic tweaks here and there to get something that, to me at least, sounded pretty decent. Okay, that's pretty much it for this video and also this mini-series. Hopefully you got something out of it. As I said, I am by no means any authority in the world of mixing or mastering, but this is what I do, this is what worked for me, and while I'm still finding my way around all of this intricate world of audio engineering, I can document some of the things that I do and share whatever tidbits of information I have with you, and hopefully you got something out of it. If you're interested in streaming Meditate, you can find it on pretty much all the streaming platforms, and you can also get the free download off of Amazing Radio. I'll post the links in the description. If you're interested in more music-related content, especially indie music that follows a DIY approach, you might find this video interesting, where I talk about album covers and what makes a good album cover in the digital age. And if you enjoy my content, I would really appreciate you subscribing. It's obviously a very small channel, and subscribing is the best way for you to help me grow the channel and also appease the algorithm overlords. Until next time, this is Meditate, and have a good one. This time around we have some green tea going on.